Hello and welcome to all those who watch and those who listen this video review of Ukrainian battlefield as of June the 6th. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm Ukrainian journalist and I'm really happy to invite you to watch this video with fresh news, live update on Ukrainian battlefield and a little bit wider than only about battlefield. So please join to us, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also comment on this. Let's start. I will start with positive news regarding our efforts to counter enemy launchers, which they use to carry out terrorist attacks with the Iskander operational tactical missile system. Please direct your attention to the screen, friends. This is a video released yesterday by our general staff as confirmation that at least one Iskander operational tactical missile system launcher, which launches ballistic missiles, was struck in the Bryansk region. In addition, two more launchers were also very likely hit by our forces, as the general staff also reported. So essentially, what do we see in this video? Fact number one: it is highly likely that an entire battery that is 3 Iskander operational tactical missile system launchers at once was destroyed. Fact number two: this is the first time in the history of our war against the Russian Federation, or more precisely, the Russian Federation's war against us, that a confirmed strike has been recorded with objective evidence showing the destruction of an Iskander operational tactical missile system. Before this, there were two instances when we supposedly struck these OTRKs. The first instance was in 2022, and the second in 2023, I believe, in Crimea. However, at that time, there was no video evidence at all. Now, there is video evidence. The video clearly shows one launcher being hit 100% at the very moment it was ready to launch an attack on our country. This is a joint effort by the armed forces of Ukraine and the security service of Ukraine, which has simply been overflowing with successful operations lately. I just want to say this: security service of Ukraine, don't stop. Please keep doing what you're doing and keep operating just as effectively. So friends, to sum up, this is the first loss of such a weapon for the Russians. These were units of the 26th Missile Brigade of the Russian forces from the town of Klintsi in the Bryansk region. Most likely, at that very moment, as they were preparing to launch, they were planning a strike on the city of Kiev. Here is the location where the strike was carried out. Here it is, in the Bryansk region, in Klintsi. From here to the capital of Ukraine, to Kiev, it's not that far, about 300 kilometers. In fact, it is said that these very launch positions were used to fire ballistic missiles at Shoska. That's Shoska. Remember, there was a strike in Shoska about 2 weeks ago on the National Guard training ground. Here too, the distance is quite reasonable, 114, 115 kilometers. And in fact, these launchers are positioned 40 kilometers from the state border with Ukraine. What does this strike indicate? What does it indicate? Of course, destroying these 3 launchers, or even just one, or damaging 2, does not deprive the Russians of significant firepower or bring them to their knees. Why? Because the Russians have about 160 such launchers for the Iskander tactical missile system. Of course, it's unknown how many of them are operational, but there are 160. Even if we have put 3 out of commission, 157 remain. But the very fact that these launchers were hit and the way it was done, the Russians don't know, because we don't see, for example, an aerial bomb strike in this video. Nor do we see a missile strike, nor do we see an artillery shell impact. It is highly likely that it was a drone. Accordingly, until the Russians find a way to counter these drones, they will be worried, they will be anxious about bringing these Iskanders as close as 30 or 40 kilometers to our positions. And here, it really is exactly 40 kilometers. From Klintsi to the state border is exactly 40 kilometers here. That's why they will be afraid to bring their equipment this close. And maybe it will be a little bit easier, because here, in such strikes, it's very important, even the philosophy, the psychology itself, when you influence the minds of the operators. When a plane is shot down during a military air operation, the other pilots think 10 times before going on a mission. And this will affect them as well. They will be more cautious, so to speak. The same applies here with these Iskander missile launchers.
which fire ballistic missiles both at the capital and at our northern frontline territories. This is the first fact I wanted to share on the map today. The second fact concerns technological development. Unfortunately, the reason we are able to reach them from afar is most likely with drones. The Russians' dumb team are also making very serious advances. Fiber optics, against which no countermeasures have been devised so far. Now, just yesterday, a video appeared. By the way, I don't rule out that this could be an enemy side video, but rest assured, technology will reach this point anyway. 4 kilograms in weight, 50 kilometers in range. As they claim, this kind of spool with fiber optic cable was wounded by the Chinese on order from the Russians. Honestly, it's hard to imagine what kind of warhead this drone would carry on such a spool, a rather large spool for 50 kilometers of cable stretching out. But the very fact that the Russians understand that fiber optics are practically immune to countermeasures, well, that's real. This is a method against which neither we nor the Russians, to be honest, and I'll repeat it again, we don't have a mechanism to counter it effectively, systematically, or on a large scale. We simply don't know how to counter it. And fiber optics are expanding, and the number of its applications is growing. It's growing, friends, to such an extent that it borders on the absurd. The absurdity lies in the fact that the first to adapt to this, it wasn't even humans who adapted to the dominance, the enormous dominance of fiber optics in nature, but birds. Look at what the birds are doing. This photo was taken by soldiers of the 12th Brigade of the National Guard Azov Special Forces, photographed how birds first built a nest out of fiber optic cable. They used fiber optics to weave their nest. Yes, of course, there are some tweaks here, but the fiber optic cable is clearly visible as the top layer. You can see very distinctly how it is wrapped around. The birds used it to build their nest, and then once the nest had served its purpose, so to speak, they abandoned it, and the soldiers took a photo of how nature was the first to adapt to the horrors present here. I'll be honest with you, not long ago I heard from someone who has experience communicating with foreigners, and I heard a statement from these foreigners that made me, well, let's put it mildly, smile broadly, in the sense of just how little people in the West understand our war. They said something like this: "Dear Ukrainian, you use a lot of FPV drones, and the Russians use a lot of FPV drones too. But every FPV drone, that's a battery, that's a power cell it carries with it. The drone crashes, delivers its strike, and the battery is left somewhere in the ground. Have you calculated the harm you are causing to the environment, to nature, as a result of using these batteries?"
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
You know, the person who told me this story, I won't say who it was, said, he's a man. He said, well, I found a very diplomatic answer for them. I said, supposedly we don't have enough resources for that. But in reality, over there in the West, they don't understand what Russia is, what it really is, what kind of plague it is, in the sense of how it charges forward without regard for anything, striking blows, just as is happening these days, unfortunately. Tragic strikes every day coming from the enemy, to which, for some reason, the United States does not respond the way they reacted to our destruction of strategic aviation, as if to say, this is an escalation, let's impose sanctions on Ukraine. Here, every day, we are hit with strikes of insane intensity, causing massive destruction. And Europeans, foreigners, they don't understand what kind of plague Ukraine has had to face. But in some ways, they are right. Nature is the first to encounter it. Defenseless nature is the first to face this barbarism that people have unleashed. So how nature adapts to this barbarism result, the conclusion you can see on the screen in the photograph taken by the soldiers of the 12th Special Purpose Brigade of the National Guard, the Azov Brigade. Well, let's move on directly to the map of combat operations. I'll start right away by talking about the north, about the Sumy region, not about any expansion of operations directly in the north of Sumy, because as I mentioned, at some point the Russians will get bogged down, even though they have made and are making advances. I want to draw attention to another area of the Kursk and Sumy regions. This is the area around the settlement of Tyotkino. You see, the geography of Tyotkino is very interesting here, because once again, it demonstrates that it's impossible to hold the defense strictly along the border. For the Russians, it would actually be ideal to pull back in the Tyotkino Ariato such a line to straighten the front, because you see further on the border runs as a continuous line and everything is fine. They would prefer to eliminate this salient, this wedge driven into our defenses, this wedge that exists here. Why? Because this is an extremely disadvantageous area to hold. In fact, our forces are holding them in a sort of encirclement from three sides. Recently, our troops have also advanced. Here, 225 Assault Regiment moved in here. They're pressing here, conducting assault operations. To be honest, it's not entirely clear why these assault operations are necessary if we don't need to storm Tyotkino. In reality, we don't need to storm Tyotkino or its outskirts. Even though the Russians complain that their troops here are surrounded, well, they are not de facto surrounded yet, but they are operationally surrounded. In principle, according to this, the landscape of the territory that is observed here will be squeezed on three sides by our troops. This is what operational encirclement means. Ideally, they should withdraw to this dashed line, but there is no political order to do so. The Russian command, on the contrary, because the political aspect is so important, to them no step back. They keep ordering units into Tyotkino, increasing the intensity here, holding this area, and under no circumstances retreating. And in fact, for us, even this scenario is ideal. We don't need to encircle the Russian troops here. We don't need to physically enter this territory or cut off their supply routes. We just need to strike their logistics, inflict maximum losses on the Russians in Tyotkino, and simply deliver intense fire from three sides, destroying the enemy troops that come in here. This is a real trap for them. Well, because there's a very logical explanation for this. Politically, the command does not allow them to abandon Tyotkino. Accordingly, if they can't leave for political reasons, it means someone has to be kept there. If someone has to be kept there, it means troops have to be constantly sent in to fill it with soldiers. And if these troops are being hit from three sides, then they are being destroyed. And accordingly, it's really just a continuous process of a cesspool where the Russians are throwing their resources completely senselessly. Absolutely. Accordingly, what we really need to do, smartest thing is to keep Tyotkino under fire in this mode, where the Russians will diligently keep sending in various units. Russian National Guard units have already been here, as well as the infamous 155 Marine Brigade from Vladivostok, which has taken some hits and recently in Rilsk. Their base was struck, their permanent deployment site on the front line in the Kursk region. Accordingly, they are being sent here as well. Feudosha troops, God, which ones paratroopers have also been sent here. So they simply need to be destroyed here with firepower, which our aviation and drone operators are doing very successful. Here you go. Video number 1 about Tyotkino. Let's start first. A short video with an airstrike. Well, in fact, it's mainly the Air Force working here very, very powerfully. The enemy's base in Tyotkino has been destroyed. The second video is from the drone operators, the drone pilots who are once again directing airstrikes here. The ASM Hammer is working. The Russian position number 1 in Tyotkino, basically, it needs to be wiped off the face of the earth like this, especially if the Russians keep sending more and more resources here. This is what we need to do, just destroy them from three sides. As of today, the information that even Russian war correspondents have written about that Russian troops in Tyotkino are physically encircled here does not, as far as I know, correspond to reality. But we don't need a physical encirclement. Firepower in this area is enough for us. This is the most important thing that essentially needs to be noted. In addition to that active area near the Sumy region, where the Russians broke through into our border zone, our troops are also trying to carry out such pulling and stretching of enemy forces along the border with Sumy, not only near Tyotkino, but in other areas as well, using asymmetric tactics. For example, take the settlement of Vasyl. Yesterday, our drone operators from the 47th Mechanized Brigade Magura carried out strikes there. That's the situation in the Sumy region. I've long said that there's no need to panic here. There is a complete understanding of how the defense should be conducted here. And it is precisely this vision that our troops are implementing, although not everything is smooth and not everything is calm. The situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains more predictable, in fact, but it is also neither smooth nor calm, because now, in particular, the southern Pokrovsk direction has become more active. We need to talk not only about the north of Pokrovsk, but also about the southern direction, starting from Lysivka, continuing with Shevchenko, Piszczane, Kotlin, Udachne, and ending here with Orikove and other areas of the Pokrovsk direction, so to speak. There are extremely intense battles taking place here. The ratio of our forces and resources to the enemies is simply incomparable, not in our favor. But in this area, even despite the fact that, pay attention, the Russians have come very close to the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and thank God they are no longer shouting about it in the information space. Here is where the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region run. Here they are. As you can see, the Russians are very close, running parallel to them just a few kilometers away. So what I'm getting at is that despite the unfavorable balance of enemy forces and resources, our troops are holding the front here very steadfastly. And at the same time, the situation has stopped being, so breakthrough and dangerous. It is quite predictable now, and we can see that if the enemy is making any advances anywhere, they are very, very minor and come at a very, very high cost. What is noteworthy, by the way, is that armored vehicles are almost not being used at all, almost none at all. The Russians simply do not have it in the quantities needed for assault operations. For the most part, they've switched to using motorcycle buggies, motorcycles, and motorcycle buggies. That's what they're using for assaults now. By the way, as previously warned, there will be active combat operations in the Zaporizhia direction as well. This was undoubtedly to be expected, the reactivation of this direction. Even its calmer sectors seem the sense that the Russians are trying to stretch out defenses, just as they are in the Sumy region, striking Zaporizhia, striking Kherson. Ultimately, yesterday's strike on the Kherson regional military administration with 2 consecutive cap bomb attacks in a single day here in the Kherson region, which targeted the city itself, is evidence that the Russians may also try to expand the front here. They're already trying to do this now, particularly in the area of the islands toward Bilozerka. They are attempting to carry out landings on the right bank. These KAB strikes are an outright war crime. Moreover, it's worth noting, by the way, that unfortunately the KABs have become more accurate. We can see how the 2 KABs that hit the Kherson Vova yesterday building of the Kherson Vovastruk exactly on target. It's been a long time since we've seen KABs not deviate from their target like this. In other words, the Russians have made corresponding improvements. So with such strikes, they will also reinforce their attempts to advance on the right bank. I don't predict that anything catastrophically large will happen here, but there will undoubtedly be attempts. Making guesses or predictions is a thankless task, so we'll see. There will be attempts in the near future. They are actually already underway now, but so far the Russians have not had any success reaching the right bank. Even dormant sections of the Zaporizhia front are being reactivated. For example, there is a settlement called Malinivka. Here it is. It used to be part of the Velika Novosilka district. At this point, I don't even know how to properly characterize this direction. Yesterday evening, the deep state analysts wrote that the Russians also tried to carry out a series of attacks here, which literally took place yesterday morning. Enemy assault groups began active combat operations here on one of the calmest sections of the front, because in reality, if you look at the general staff reports, the Orikhiv, Huliaipol, and all these Zaporizhia directions have the fewest combat engagements according to the general staff summaries that are published daily. Here, near Malinivka, the Russians, in numerous groups of up to 7 people, repeatedly carried out offensive actions with the aim of capturing this village. A little to the east of Malinivka, they managed to enter the tree lines near this settlement. So in these areas, but no further, not into the village itself. They tried to catch us off guard, but our fighters were perfectly prepared and expected that there would be attacks. They also anticipated that there would be this whole escalation, so to speak, in Zaporizhia region. Again, almost no heavy equipment is observed, only buggy. Well, the fighters are convinced that both today and tomorrow combat operations will resume here, just as they have on other sections of the Zaporizhia front, as well as in the Kherson region. I think that in the near future, we should expect these kinds of. They will also try to reinforce themselves with panic-inducing messages, shouting alarm, alarm, alarm. Soon, get ready for the capture of Zaporizhia and Kherson. So these are, of course, Russian information campaigns which we should not, cannot, and will not fall for. And I, friends, will do my best to help you not to fall for all these manipulations and campaigns. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and see you next time.